Yo, what's happening? Peace, peace. What's happening? Peace and power, elevation beats all you beautiful folks. It's your girl Tiffany here, live in effect. And on this beautiful day, on February the 3rd, 2025, this is Black History Month. Black History Month. And we still at the beginning and we gotta celebrate it right. So somebody asks, well, I kind of do. I kind of do miss being on here because I don't do it as much as I used to. All right. Appreciate y'all coming through. All right. So we're going to talk about the Elmina Castle in Ghana and why it's so significant. Now, if you guys been paying attention about the African diaspora going over there to Ghana, Ghana is the hot topic right now. A lot of people going over there, getting their citizenship, getting ready to move over there, live in the area, whatnot. And the main attraction where people go and tour it is the Elmina Castle. They had the what is it called? The year of no return, I believe that's what it was called. So a lot of people from the diaspora got a chance to go over there and travel. And people may wonder, well, what is it? What is so significant about the Elmina Castle? Because this connects the dot to the Black community, not just the Caribbean, not just Britain or South America or Latin America, but also here in the United States. So when you study our history, right, you got to go back. You got to go further back. You got to go further back into time. You got to dig into the archive. Okay. Thank you. Point of no, what's it called? Point of no return. That's what it's called. So every year they do like a tourist attraction over there in Ghana. They have people going around showing them the museums over there. And to be honest, that's a great thing. That's great that a lot of people get an opportunity to travel, to actually see what one of the slave trade ports was located, because it's multiple. But this one happened to be like one of the earliest form of the slave ports during that time period. Okay, this port was built around 1482. And remember, one of the first Europeans that traveled to Central West Africa were the Portuguese and Spanish. So I'm gonna go ahead and get into it. I don't want to hold you up. All right, so I got some sources here. All right, so let's go ahead and get to the source. Just want to. Let's see. Hopefully, you guys can see it. Cool. All right. So this is very important right here. So the article comes from the impact of European presence in slavery in the 16th to the 18th century Gold Coast, which is now Ghana. And it's written by Kawabina Abdul Bohan. Is it Kawabina Abdul Bohan at the University of Cape Coast, right? Now let's go down to the very bottom. Let me try. Trying to see. All right, so it says slavery in West Africa origins, right? The institution of slavery in various parts of West Africa had variable contexts of origin, deriving as much from differing geographical environments as economic, social, and political circumstances. The earliest written reference to the slave trade related to the Fizan in the Maghreb and dates back to the 7th century AD. Later, sub-Saharan Africa became a major source of slave supply to the Maghreb and the Mediterranean world. Okay. From the 9th century on, the slave trade came to have significant disruptive effects on West Africa, as Muslim writers such as Al Istaqari al Yaqubi and Hadud al-Alam observed in AD 851, 872, and 892 to 93, respectively. In the 10th century, slave trading activities involving the Sudan belt was already well organized, and by 11th century, as Al-Idris noted, Western Sudanese states such as Ghana, Takaru, and Silla were actively engaged in reducing the inhabitants of Lamlam, situated in the more southerly areas of the Sudan region, to captivity and exported northwards across the Sahara. All right, so I'm gonna stop right there. Now, in the beginning, in the beginning, you gotta understand that before there was the transatlantic slave trade, right? You had the trans-Saharan slave trade. And you may wonder, well, what's the trans-Saharan slave trade? Okay, the trans-Saharan slave trade was during the time where the Muslims, right, were taking Africans in the northwestern region of Africa, which they call it Maghreb, okay? And they were enslaving them. Well, I shouldn't say Muslim, I would say the Berber. Let me say the Berber people. The Berber people and the Amazon people, right? They were trading slaves from northwestern Africa to all the way over to the northeastern part of Africa. Okay. So, yeah, they had their own slave trade going on already. Then later, the transatlantic slave trade took place. Y'all, excuse me. I'm sorry. There's noise going on in the background. So, okay, I apologize about that. There's noise going on in the background. So, all right. Okay, so I'm gonna get through the noise. So I apologize for the constant noise. But anyways, during that time period, there was a transatlantic slave trade. I mean, trans-Saharan slave trade taking place. So the transatlantic slave trade came along like around that time period. Okay, so if y'all excuse me, like I said, I got the noise going on, so it kind of interrupted me. I mean, I don't know why they would decide to do some work at this time of night, but okay. All right, then. So let's go further down. Mm-mm-mm. Yikes. All right. So now let's go down where it says evolution of slavery in the Gold Coast. Generally, there was a close connection between the beginning of settled life and the emergence of slavery. Slavery existed in some form of certain areas of present day Ghana well before the modern period. However, the widespread institutionalization of slavery may be appropriately situated in the early modern era when state building activities in the country intensified, ultimately bringing warfare and the subjugation and enslavement of vulnerable peoples. Institutionalized servitude may then have appeared first in the Savannah area to the north of the forest belt of present day Ghana. All right. So it says by the 15th century, the northern Savannah area had been drawn into the Trans Saharan trade network. As a result of that development, traders from the Western Sudan extended their activities to the area and even established a trading town, Bigo, just to the north of the forest belt as early as about AD 1100. These foreign traders exchanged various goods and slaves for gold produced in the forests and the savannah areas south of the Black Volta River. All right, so now let's go into the beginnings. So it says the beginnings of the Atlantic slave trade. By 1500, the physical presence of Europeans in West Africa had begun to spawn in Atlantic slave commerce, which affected the pattern of trade in coastal societies of the Western African seaboard, particularly the area that became known as the Slave Coast, stretching from the east bank of the Lower Volta to the Niger Delta, and for our purpose, the Gold Coast. The Portuguese exported of slaves during the early stages of the Atlantic slave trade initially involved the shipments of enslaved Africans to Portugal and Atlantic islands such as Cape Verde and Sao Tome off the coasts of Senegambia and Angola, respectively. Right? Small numbers of Africans were being sporadically transshipped from Portugal to the New World by the 1500s, but the real beginning of the huge regular transatlantic shipment of slaves was in the 1510. In that year, up to 250 slaves, 50 Africans were transshipped from Lisbon to Brazil. 3 years later, a slave trading licensing system was inaugurated, and in 1518, the Portuguese made the first direct shipment of slaves from the West African coast to the New World. Okay, so right there, that lets you know the very beginning around the 1500s. Okay, so let's go further down. It says the growth of European mercantile activities generally influence the fortunes of the privileged in society, while at the same time stimulate the expansion and diversification of slavery in various coastal society in West Africa. In Senegambia, involvement in the European initiated slave trade had, as early as the 1500s, greatly enriched the local rulers who contribute much to the growth of the trade. The Kingdom of Benin also became a major slave trading state and the point of embarkation of slaves for a brisk intra-West African in the early phase of the Atlantic slave trade. All right. So it goes on to say the Portuguese even labeled a river in Benin from whose basin large numbers of slaves were shipped intra-coastally and to various Atlantic slave destinations, Rio dos Escravos, which is the river of slaves. The Gold Coast became a destination for slaves during the early intra-West African slave traffic. As Patrick Manning observed, the initial lineaments of the West African system of slavery and slave trade were in place. By the middle of the 17th century, during the first century of direct European trading, including slave trading, contacts with West Africa. As Walter Rodney notes, there was a phenomenal expansion of slavery in areas of the Upper Guinea where it had not previously been prevalent. In addition, the constant export of more male slaves than females across the Atlantic had by the 17th century begun to transform slavery in West Africa, with females under servitude far outstripping males. All right. So I know some of y'all out there is probably gonna take it and run away with this and say, well, let me see. Hey Kenya, how you doing? Shout out to you. Long time, brother. Yes, it's been a long time. But anyways, I know some of you out there is gonna take this information and run with it. Like, well, see, why we still claiming those people over there? Those people ain't our people. They sold us into slavery. See, some of y'all gonna take that and y'all gonna run away with it, and without really getting to know the whole entire history. So just because there were those who played their part in it does not mean that their DNA is no longer in our body or their DNA is no longer part of us. You can disarm or you can not claim someone, but at the end, they are still a part of you genetically. So you gotta understand, in order to gain the concept of reparation, this is where you got to go and prove that okay, your ancestors were enslaved. If you're gonna talk about slavery in America, you got to go way back to the African continent. You just can't say, well, let's just start right here in America. I mean, you could start from the beginning, but you can't say, well, this is where our history started right here in America. No, it goes further back. It goes much further back, whether you like to hear it or not. Okay. Um, so going down here, watch this. Slavery and slave trading in the Gold Coast, right? Initially, slaves in the Gold Coast basically served domestic function. Slave labor was, however, more intensively exploited for gold extraction, usually controlled by the ruling aristocracies, right? In his study of Gayamin and Asante, Emmanuel Terray shows how slave labor could become vital to the economy of gold producing and trading states. Now, do you understand what was the reason behind the slave trade? The reason why the slave trade took place was to build up the economy, right? And gold producing and trading states. So what these people thought, they figure, okay, if we trade off the slaves, the prisoners, to the Atlantic, right? We will earn more profit. We will build more economy. This is what the slave traders thought at that time period. Okay, those who were involved in this, they figured, well, if we trade the slaves off to the Europeans, then we can make more profit. We can build up our economy. But they did not realize that it was going to backfire on them later on. They didn't realize that they fell into a trap. And that's exactly what happened. A lot of the countries, right, that played a part in the transatlantic slave trade, they end up falling into a trap with the Europeans. They pretty much dug a hole for themselves and didn't realize they were doing so. Because the Europeans said, okay, we want more. We want more than just the slaves. We want to take over the economy. We want to take over the resources over there. We want to be able to control the land because we see that y'all have the natural resources that we're looking for. So eventually it backfired on those in the particular countries where our ancestors came from. It backfired on them because they end up getting colonized by the very same Europeans they were doing business with. So, and yes, this impacted those in the continent because they lost their loved ones to the Atlantic. So it impacted those who were already there. Family members were hurt. It impacted them multiple ways. So if you think that those in the continent of Africa were not impacted by slavery, yes, they were. Because their family started falling apart. They lost their loved ones and they realized that they were never going to see their loved ones again. It's just like when you take a child from their biological parent, right? And the person that's doing the kidnapping, right? They become the parent of that child. So this child grow up thinking that the person that kidnapped them was their parent. All, yeah, they think that this person was their parent, was their biological, was the one that gave birth to them or brought them into this life, right? Until they realize that later on this individual or these people were not the ones that was responsible for their birth. However, they were responsible for taking them away from their biological family. So when they get around their biological family, it's like their biological family become unknown to them. Their biological family is like a foreign individual to them. They don't have any type of connection with those individuals because they've been away, or they will never get a chance to see them or meet those people again. So that's the same thing with us in the diaspora and those in the continent. In our eyes, we say that these people are foreign to us. We don't know these people. We don't, and we cannot acknowledge these people because we've been away from them for such a long time. We don't know who they are, and they don't know us because they have not learned much about us. They don't know much about what we've been through. So it's like we become very foreign to each other, right? And then we have the attitude with those in the Caribbean and those in South America, same thing. Or when you start unite with them, when you start to reunite, then y'all start to learn more about each other. You start to learn that you have a lot of commonality. You start seeing the connection. And that's what happens. So when you oppress a person, right? When you are enslaving individual, you're not just enslaving them physically, you're enslaving them psychologically and emotionally. When you are enslaving an individual, right, you don't just do it physically, you're doing it psychologically as well. So we dealt with psychological slavery. So although we're no longer in physical slavery, we are dealing with psychological slavery. So the Elmina Castle is very important for us because this is where we can learn about our ancestors and what tribe they came from. Where were they taken from in the parts of West Africa? That's where we can learn about their history. We can go and backtrack the information. But yes, the problem is they're not going to teach this in school. They'll never give us this type of information. They're not going to go as far back. And we cannot expect them to do so. So we have to do what is necessary. We have to tell the stories. We cannot expect for our oppressor to teach us what y'all don't realize, that we are still under psychological slavery. Here in the West, we are dealing with psychological slavery. We're dealing with the condition of it. We're dealing with psychological slavery. So if you think you're not under psychological slavery, that's where you're wrong. Because you are. Indeed, you are. So now let's continue with the article. Let's go down. Let me scroll down. All right, I'm gonna get to this last paragraph right here. It says gold merchants from the coastal and subcoastal district trading at Elmina were the main buyers of imported slaves. From the mid 1470s to about 1540, the Portuguese imported over 12,000 slaves to Elmina. This figure does not include what smugglers and interlopers landed. The Dutch, who by 1642 had dislodged the Portuguese from the Gold Coast, also imported slaves to Elmina for sale to Gold Coast slave buyers. Okay, Gold Coasters, particularly those of the Fonte area, were also involved in the intra-West African slave trade as correspondents of Gold Coast-based slave traders. R.A. Kia estimates that about 500 slaves were brought from all directions into the area of modern Ghana for sale every year, and that an overall aggregated over aggregate of over 100,000 were imported from late 15th to late 17th century. Okay, so these people, our African ancestors, they were brought over to the Gold Coast, to Elmina, and they were sold every year. Okay. And it says the growing slave traffic was a reflection of increasing level of importance of slavery to Gold Coasters owing to the presence and activities of European traders on the Gold Coast. The regular importation of slaves implied an expansion of slavery in the Gold Coast, but this did not create a slave society in which slavery was central to the economy, as was the case in the New World. From the late 15th century, the gold mining areas in the Gold Coast hinterland witnessed an increasing inflow of slaves. Such increased slave imports were necessary to obtain the labor required for increased gold production in order to meet the vast European demand for that commodity. And up to about the middle of the 17th century, European slave traders in West Africa generally avoided procuring any slaves from the Gold Coast and its hinterland. They rationalized that they rationalized that any such activity would disrupt the society there and have adverse effects on gold production and supply. Increased slave imports and gold production promoted economic growth, but the greater output of gold also meant intensified extraction of slave labor power. All right. So, not to go any further, but again, you guys can look this up on your own. And the title of the article is called The Impact of European Presence on Slavery in the 16th and 18th Century Gold Coast. All right. So, you can find it on jaster.org. I already post the information in the description link. So if you guys want to look it up, you can check it out for yourself. Okay. All right. So now let's go to another article, which is the Ghana Museum and the Monuments Board. You're welcome, sister, and I appreciate you. I check out this sister's channel, Bolden Unchained. You guys should check her channel out. She does a great job. She has plenty of sources, plenty of books on there. So you guys, when you get a chance to, make sure you like and subscribe to her channel. Thank you for coming through. Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, look, see, everybody wasn't siding with the white man, but those who did, yes, it did backfire on them. But you have to be careful. And even here in America, we still doing that. And you see it all the time. You see those who try to be on the bandwagon, especially when it comes to politics. Because now you see what's going on in politics, right? Some people talking about they regretting the fact that they voted for a certain individual. Yep. But let's go ahead and go to the next article. All right, so down here, it says St. George Castle, Elmina, right, 1482. Renowned as the first major European construction in tropical Africa, St. George Castle in the town of Elmina in the central region of Ghana was founded by the Portuguese in 1482. Okay. So it says St. George Castle, as the castle was known to the Portuguese, afforded the Portuguese a trade monopoly in the area with unraveled access to the region gold. Right? And said the sheer magnitude of trade volumes resulted in labor challenges as naives were unable to convey the large quantities of European goods to all markets. The importation of slaves from Benin in exchange for gold and ivory in the early 16th century was the identified solution. However, not long after, the influx of superior gold from Mexico into Europe caused gold prices to plummet rapidly. All right. So that means that the prices went up. When they say plummet rapidly, that means the prices don't went up. So the economy or economically distraught, Portuguese were easily ousted from Elmina in 1637 by the Dutch. Okay, so the main Dutch trades were gold and slaves. They reconstructed the castle between 1770 and 1775. Until 1872, the castle served as the focal coordinating point for the Dutch Gold Coast activities. In 1682, the Arthur Jean Barbite described St. George Castle as having no equal on all the coast of Guinea with respect to beauty and strength. All right. So it says April 6th of 1872, the castle was succeeded to the British. In recent years, it has served as police recruit training center, a secondary school, and is presently a historical museum. St. George Castle is featured on the UNESCO World Heritage List. All right, so according to the information, right, the castle was ran it was ran by the Portuguese, and then from the Portuguese it was ran by the Dutch people, and from the Dutch it was controlled by the British. So yes, the Europeans, they would compete with each other when it came down to slavery, when it came down to the resources in Africa. They were in competition because they were trying to gather as much sources as much as possible, and they were trying to gather up as much slaves, because they look at it like this: the more slaves you have, the more income. The more slaves you have, the more you build up your economy. The more natural resources you got, the more profit you're going to make. So the whole purpose of slavery was to generate profit, was to build up the economy of the country which was occupying slavery. Okay. So places like Britain, the Netherlands, France, okay, Portugal, Spain, they would not be where they at today if it wasn't for slavery. They would not be as popular in Europe if it wasn't for slavery. Even here in United States would not be where it's at today if it wasn't for slavery. Hmm? I mean, just think about it. Capitalism and slavery go hand in hand. So what we're looking at here is global capitalism. So Elmina Castle was a global capitalism for the European. Elmina Castle was global capitalism for the European because that's where they can go and buy slaves. They can transport slaves to the areas and they could buy them and send them all to the Atlantic to do the work, to labor for free. It was cheaper to get black slaves than it was to keep any other group. So it was much cheaper to just buy some slaves from Africa and make more profit. And the more slaves you buy for cheap, the more money that you're going to generate. And I'm going to tell you the real reason why we keep fighting for reparation. Because for one, slavery was a global commodity. Slavery was a it was a global commodity. Okay? That means that it was an international business. It was not just a regional business, all right? So something like this cannot just be taken with the United States. It's really going to be something that has to be taken to the world court because the United States is not going to pay out. So that's the world court that you got to take it to. That's one. And then two, if there was reparation, you know how much that would be? That would be trillions of dollars. Billions, almost trillions that would be owed to the descendants of the slaves. So that means that America will have to change its economic system from capitalism to whether it be socialism, communism, whatever, but America will have to change the economic system. And that is a battle in itself. Many people are not willing to put up a fight to get rid of capitalism. Why? Because they're making profits. They're wealthy. Even our very own black people who are in the wealthy bracket, right? The ones that are multimillionaires and billionaires, they're not willing to give up their profits. They're not willing to give it up. So they going to advocate for capitalism, whether they say it or not. The action is going to speak for itself. So this economy is not going to give it up. They're not going to change the system around and to give what is due to the descendant of slaves. And if that should happen, if it should happen, it's not going to happen in our lifetime. It's not going to happen in our lifetime. I know y'all gonna argue, well, what about the Japanese? They got some reparation. The Jews got the reparation from Holocaust. Okay. Okay, and that don't mean they gonna give us something. That doesn't mean anything. That means that if they gonna have to give us reparation, they gonna have to change the economic system. And I'm telling you right now, they're not willing to do that. So it don't matter how much fight we put up. This economy is not going to change. It's not going to change. So during Black History Month, I want everybody to take their time out to study about the Elmina Castle, go more into details about it, why it's so important. And I'm going to repeat myself until you guys get it. You can't talk about slavery without going back into where your ancestors came from. You can't say, well, let's talk about just American slavery alone. You can't just do that. You got to go back to where it started. When you go back to where it started, then you could bring it all the way up to the front. But you got to go where it started and where your ancestor was taken from. They were taken from Central West Africa. And no, there was no black people already here. There has not been any proof and evidence that were black people already here occupying this land. There was no black people already in this place. Okay? They were not indigenous to this land. They were indigenous to Africa. The people that you arguing about that's indigenous to this land are what you call Native Americans. And our people are not Native Americans, all right? Our African ancestors are African people. Now, there are those who may have some Native American myths in them because of the Africans slaves or the former African slaves have a relationship with the Native Americans, intermarrying, interbreeding. But outside of that, our African ancestors did not occupy this land. All right. They were not indigenous to this land. And I wish people would stop making such an argument. You got to tell it for what it is. I know you want to romanticize history. I know it feels good. I know you want to hear the feel good rhetoric, right? I know you want to feel some kind of way, but you got to go back. And you got to realize history is not going to always make you feel good. There is good, bad, and ugly in every part of history. And this happens to be the ugly part that we got to deal with. It's ugly, okay? So you got to go back. And it might be painful to go back. It is. It's just like you have to go back and recall the things that happened to you in your childhood, right? Growing up in a household, right? You don't want to go back there, but eventually you're going to have to revisit that trauma just so you can get past and you can be able to heal and you can be able to have some understanding and find peace within yourself, right? That's the same thing when it comes to studying about the history of slavery. You're going to have to go back to that trauma because it was traumatizing for those ancestors. And then what make it sad is that those who were the slave traders, they end up becoming slaves themselves. And then we got to realize that we also descended of those who were the traders, who were the liberated Africans. So you got to go back to that trauma. You got to revisit and see what they had to go through, what they had to deal with. And that's why a lot of people go to Africa every year, to Ghana, to Elmina Castle, to revisit, to go back to what their ancestor had to endure. They had to go back and pay homage to those people. And it made them realize that, dang ye, all this shit that these people had to go through, I would not be where I'm at today. And it's some type of ritual they do. It's like a song they sang or something. I gotta look it up. But every year they also do some type of I don't know, it's like it's not a festival they have, but it's like some type of commemoration or celebration to honor those who were enslaved. So basically they'll sing a song. And I mean, you'll have to see the video for yourself. You'll have to look it up. So I have to look up the name because I meant to do so. And I forgot to look up what it's called. But yeah, you have to replay that trauma over and over again. So when you go back, you're not going back on the vacation. And it might be a vacation spot, but at the same time, it's not a vacation. It's to pay homage. It's to remember. It's to remember what those people had to go through, what these people had to endure. So it's like when you go there, you gonna feel that spirit of your ancestor around you. You may moan, you may grieve, you may feel some form of anger because you have to revisit that whole situation. You have to put yourself in their shoes and see what it's like to deal with those traumatic experience, being taken away from your loved one and being sent off into a land that you know nothing about, being around people that you don't even know who they are. They're not even related to you. And you got to readapt to another society. You got to find your place in this society. You got to develop a culture where you can be comfortable in. So when we study about the transatlantic slave trade, it's not just history that we dealing with, it's reconnecting with our roots. It's going back to your roots. And that's exactly what you're doing. You're going back to the roots. So anybody that get upset about people going to Africa, going to places like Ghana, Nigeria, Liberia, Sierra Leone, the Cameroon, Senegambia, or the Congo, if anybody get upset with that, then you need to start questioning yourself. Why are you upset? If you don't get upset when people go to Europe, you don't have a problem when people go to Canada, but then you have a problem when people decide to go to Africa. That's your roots. It don't matter how you feel. That is your roots. You got to reconnect with your roots. That is who you are. That's your bloodline. That bloodline is not going to be erased. You cannot get rid of that part of you. You must reconnect with your roots. And to be honest, you must appreciate your roots. You must say, you know what? I came from some very strong, vibrant, intelligent people. Because these people weren't just slaves. These people had gifts. They had talents. You talking about people who were gurus, educators, cooks, pastoralists, agriculturalists, fighters, warriors, and the list goes on. So they were not just slaves. They were somebody. Mothers, fathers, grandparents, children, respected elders in the community. The list goes on. And let nobody shame you. Let nobody shame you for reconnecting with your roots. Do not let anybody make you feel guilty for that. If they make you feel guilty, it's because you gave them the power to do so. You gave these people power to do so because they feel guilty about it. But in order for you to break free, you got to go back to your roots. In order to break free, you must go back to your roots. And that's all I have for tonight. So I'm not going to keep you guys up because it's late on my end. But I just wanted to get on here and talk about this subject matter. And I'm going to make sure I keep posting up books for you guys. All right. The book that I want you guys to read is Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. I have it in handy, but I don't feel like getting it. But you know what? I also got another book. I got another book here. This book is it's fishing. It's a fiction novel, but this novel connects back to the concept of slavery, right? And it talks about the slavery and the diaspora. It talks about the Africans in the continent. But this book is a fishing book. And the book that I'm talking about, which I highly recommend people to get, is by Tommy Adeyemi. The name of it is Children of the Blood and Bone by Tommy Adeyemi. Right? So you guys get this book by this sister right here. It's a fiction novel, but it has a relationship talking about slavery and the diaspora. So back here it says they killed my mother. They took our magic. They tried to bury us. Now we rise. If you guys don't get a chance to, please do so. So for Black History, I want you guys to check out this book. Okay. And she has plenty of other books as well. But yeah, this book right here, it's pretty deep. It goes into the history about the transatlantic slave trade and the connection to the diaspora. However, it's a fiction novel, but it's worth reading. And also make sure you get Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Get his book if you guys get a chance. All right. Okay, so the first one I said was Walter Rodney, How Europe Developed Africa. Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Okay. And this book is called Children of Blood and Bone by Tommy Adeyemi. Children of Blood and Bone by Tommy Adeyemi. So I hope you got that, sister. All right. Hey, how you doing, brother Sahil? Shout out to Sahil. Thank you for coming through. Peace. All right, sister. I hope you got it. I hope you got the name of it. If you need me to type it in, I'll type it in for you. All right. So hopefully you got it. If not, then I'll make sure I type it in the comment section. All right. So you guys can check out the names of the books. Yeah, please do so. Get those books and have them in your archives. Yes. Have those books in your archives. So that's it. That's all I have for tonight. I'm not gonna keep y'all up. All right, it's late over here, so I know some of y'all might have to go work or do something else. You might have to tend to your family, but I thank you guys for giving me your time, for coming through and watching my channel. Make sure you like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, share the channel, tell a friend to tell a friend. But yeah, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And I will keep you all posted. So peace. All right, thank you.